I stepped off the bus at Fort Carson with the same duffel I'd carried through 2 deployments. The air was thin and dry, a Colorado kind of cold that cuts through even a uniform. 3 days earlier, I had been in Kuwait briefing a unit on new counter-surveillance gear. Now I was home, because my grandfather, Walter Pierce, was gone. He wasn't just a grandfather. He was the man who raised me when my parents split, a former Army engineer who built a cybersecurity company from nothing and still grilled burgers for the neighbors on weekends. The military gave me habits I couldn't shake, so even on leave, I woke up at 0500. The day of the funeral, I stood in front of the mirror, pressed my Class A uniform flat, polished the brass. The reflection looked steady, but my stomach felt like I was prepping for a patrol. I'd seen a lot of flag-draped coffins overseas, but I never thought I'd be walking behind one for him. At the chapel in Colorado Springs, soldiers from his old unit had come in full dress. There were old engineers, gray-haired colonels, and a few contractors from Pierce Defense Systems, the company he had started. It wasn't a huge service, but every person there had a story about how Walter had fixed something for them, found them a job, or told them to stop feeling sorry for themselves. My sister Marlene arrived late, which wasn't a shock. She wore a black designer coat and sunglasses big enough to hide a hangover. Marlene was 4 years older, had spent 6 months in the Army Reserve before quitting after a misconduct investigation, and since then had floated from one consulting gig to another. She managed our family finances after our mother's death, a role she liked to remind me about. She kissed a few cheeks, whispered something to a lawyer in a corner, and slid into the front row like she owned the place. I sat 2 rows back with a couple of Grandpa's old coworkers from the base. One of them handed me a folded photo of Walter at a project site in 1985, smiling next to a row of servers. It was the kind of picture you only see in company newsletters, but it still hit me. The service was simple. A chaplain read a psalm, an honor guard folded the flag. I stood to salute. My eyes stayed dry until the bugler played taps. That's when my training stopped helping. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep steady. Across the aisle, Marlene dabbed at her eyes with a tissue but never smudged her mascara. After the burial, people moved to the reception hall. There were sandwiches, weak coffee, and too many business cards. Contractors wanted to talk about PDS's future. Old friends wanted to tell me how proud Walter had been of my service. And one older woman whispered that she hoped the company stays in good hands. Every time someone said company, they glanced toward Marlene. She was standing with Howard Drummond, Grandpa's lawyer, a tall man with the squared-off posture of someone who had once worn a uniform himself. I remembered him from my ROTC commissioning. He had been Grandpa's guest back then. Howard caught my eye over Marlene's shoulder and gave me a small nod. It was quick, but it felt like a signal. I didn't go over. Instead, I walked outside to the smoking area even though I don't smoke. Snow was falling lightly, melting on the pavement. My phone buzzed. An email from Howard's office inviting me to the will reading tomorrow morning. No other details. Back inside, Marlene was already talking to a local journalist about modernizing PDS. I heard her say the phrase, "new era for national security," and almost laughed. She'd barely passed her security clearance before she got kicked out of the reserves. I kept my distance, accepted condolences, and answered questions about my deployment in short sentences. People always assume military intelligence means cloak and dagger stories. Mostly it's spreadsheets, pattern analysis, and trying to keep soldiers from clicking bad links. Grandpa loved that part. He said cyber defense was just the new form of perimeter fencing. When the crowd thinned, I slipped out the side door and walked to my rental car. The Pierce homestead sat only 15 minutes away. A 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and the same flagpole Grandpa had raised every morning. It had been my home until I enlisted. I drove there out of habit. The house looked the same from the outside, but the driveway was lined with Marlene's friends' cars. Loud music came from the garage. Through the front window, I saw catering trays. I didn't go in. Not yet. Back at my base quarters, I set the photo of Grandpa on the desk, next to my Bronze Star. I checked my email again. The appointment with Howard was confirmed. My uniform hung on the closet door. I still hadn't unpacked my duffel. Sleep didn't come easy. The funeral kept replaying. The flag folding. Marlene's sunglasses. Howard's nod. Something about the way people talked about good hands gnawed at me. Grandpa was careful, methodical, and didn't trust showboats. Leaving everything to Marlene didn't sound like him. I woke up before dawn and ran 5 miles on the track, the cold biting my lungs. Routine keeps the mind clear. After a shower, I ironed a plain suit instead of my uniform, not wanting to stand out at the lawyer's office. The office was in downtown Colorado Springs, in an old bank building with marble floors. The receptionist recognized me and ushered me into a conference room. The table was long, the kind you'd see in a boardroom. Water bottles lined up in front of each chair. Howard entered with a briefcase and gave me a firm handshake. "Captain Blake," he said like we were still on a base. He sat opposite me. "We'll start when your sister arrives," he said. "She's coming?" She confirmed. I nodded and looked out the window at the mountains. At 10:05, Marlene walked in wearing another designer coat, holding a leather portfolio. She kissed Howard on the cheek and sat at the head of the table like it was hers. Howard cleared his throat. "This is the official reading of Walter Pierce's last will and testament." I folded my hands and kept my face neutral, like I was at a briefing. Howard began to read, his voice steady. The words felt like static until he got to the part about the company and the estate. Everything the Pierce homestead, the company shares, liquid assets totaling $95 million transferred to Marlene Pierce. He paused and then read my part, a brief note thanking me for my service and a memento yet to be specified. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. I glanced at Marlene. She smiled just enough to show teeth. Howard kept reading about procedural details, but I barely heard him. My grandfather had left me nothing? Not even a share? When the reading ended, Marlene stood and extended her hand like she was closing a deal. "No hard feelings, sis. You've got the army. I've got the company." I didn't take her hand. Howard closed the folder and looked at me with that same measured expression from the funeral. It wasn't sympathy exactly. It was something else. Marlene walked out, heels clicking, already on her phone. I stayed seated. Howard said quietly, "Captain, do you have a moment?" I nodded. He waited until the door shut. "Don't assume today was the final word." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Just come back tomorrow morning. Alone. Same time." I hesitated but then said, "All right." Howard gave a small smile, the kind you'd miss if you weren't trained to notice micro-expressions. I left the office without saying another word, walked past the marble lobby, and stepped out into the cold. The mountains looked the same, but everything else felt like it was moving. I pulled my coat tighter and headed for my car, my mind already scanning possibilities the way it does before an operation. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I left Howard's building. Cold air seeped through a crack in the window, and I rolled it up, forcing my hands to relax. At the next light, I turned away from the base and instead drove toward a diner I'd gone to with Grandpa after ROTC drills. It was nearly empty at that hour, a few truckers at the counter, and a waitress refilling coffee. I ordered black coffee and toast I didn't intend to eat, trying to map out my next move without making it obvious to myself that I was planning anything. By the time the coffee was cold, my phone buzzed with another message from Howard's office confirming the appointment. 0900, private. No explanation, just a time. I slid the phone back into my pocket and paid the check. The waitress gave me a polite smile. She'd served me and Grandpa before and remembered his name. "Sorry for your loss," she said quietly. I nodded once and stepped back out into the street. Snow had started to fall again. The Pierce homestead was only a few miles away, but I drove past it without slowing. Marlene's friends' cars were still lined up. The garage door cracked open. Music thumped inside, wrong for a house still heavy with funeral flowers. I kept driving. Back at my quarters, I spread out my laptop and a legal pad. Military intelligence trains you to gather facts, not just hunches. I wrote, "Will, 95M, to Marlene. Me, nothing. Howard, meeting 0900. Underneath, I scribbled, "Fiduciary duty?" with a question mark. Grandpa had used that phrase once when explaining how he structured the company board. He said trustees had a legal duty, not just a moral one. I remembered because he'd been proud of teaching me a new word. Sleep didn't happen that night either. I woke before the alarm, showered, and pressed my suit again. I pinned my hair back the way Grandpa liked, neat and squared. Howard's office was quieter that morning, the marble echo muted by carpets. The receptionist led me to a smaller conference room this time, wood paneling instead of marble. No water bottles, just a single folder on the table. Howard entered alone. No briefcase today, only the folder. He shut the door and stayed standing for a moment, like he was checking the hallway for eavesdroppers. Then he sat across from me and opened the folder. "I can't discuss everything yet," he said. "But I can tell you this. Your grandfather anticipated what your sister might do." I kept my eyes on his. "He left her everything." Howard shook his head slightly. "On paper, yes. In reality, there are conditions. Your sister has a 30-day fiduciary duty to preserve assets and protect immediate family. Evicting you from the homestead was her first violation. Signing new contracts and moving company money around would be another." I felt my jaw tighten. So what happens? If violations are documented, a sealed codicil to the will comes into force. That codicil places all assets into a legacy trust. The trustee named in that codicil is you. I sat back, steadying my breath. "You're saying he set a trap?" "I'm saying he left a structure. It's my job as executor to ensure it's enforced. But there are procedures. The Department of Defense has ongoing contracts with Pierce Defense Systems. If the company's leadership changes abruptly, security reviews trigger automatically. We can use those reviews to pause spending until the probate court signs off." I nodded slowly, the way I would during a briefing. "What do you need from me?" Howard slid a sheet of paper toward me. "Stay quiet. Don't contact your sister. Don't challenge her publicly. Don't post anything online. Let her act. Meanwhile, I'll request temporary holds on accounts under the pretext of audit. We'll gather documentation. If she behaves responsibly, the codicil doesn't activate. If she doesn't, it does." I read the sheet. It was a simple acknowledgement of confidentiality, nothing dramatic. I signed and handed it back. Howard closed the folder. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about honoring Walter's intent." "I know," I said. "He taught me patience before tactics." Howard allowed a small smile. "Then we're on the same page." I left the office without seeing Marlene. Outside, the snow had stopped and the sun cut across the mountains. I walked 2 blocks before heading to my car, making sure I wasn't being followed, a habit from deployments more than paranoia. Back at base, I kept to routine. PT in the morning, short meals at the mess, checking in with my unit. No one asked about the funeral. They knew better. In the evenings, I read old emails Grandpa had sent me, his dry jokes about contractors who thought they were smarter than soldiers, his pride when I made captain. On the 5th day after the will reading, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Pierce Defense Systems CEO announces major renovation project. There was a photo of Marlene in front of the homestead, announcing a new vision for the company. She wore a hard hat for the cameras. The article said she'd hired a designer to convert the old library into a command lounge and planned to modernize the brand. I forwarded the article to Howard with no comment. 2 minutes later, he replied, "Document saved." I closed the phone and leaned back in my chair. Outside my window, soldiers were running drills, shouting cadence. The rhythm of boots on pavement matched the rhythm of my thoughts. Grandpa's voice in my head, "Never rush to strike. Let the enemy expose their flank." Another email from Howard arrived that evening. "First hold request accepted. Accounts partially frozen pending review." He didn't add a smiley face or exclamation point. He didn't need to. I shut the laptop and looked at the photo of Grandpa again. The house, the company, the money, none of it had been mine when he was alive. What I'd inherited was his training. Patience, discipline, the long view. The next morning I drove past the homestead again. Trucks were unloading materials. Workers were carrying out old books and furniture from the library. Marlene stood on the porch directing them, her voice carrying across the lawn. She looked like she was winning. I parked down the street and stayed inside the car. Through binoculars, I saw a catering van pull up. She was hosting some kind of leadership retreat for potential investors. The kind of thing Grandpa would have called a circus. My phone buzzed again. Howard had sent a secure message. "Do not engage. Hold request on second account in process. Continue documentation." I lowered the binoculars. A gust of wind blew across the street, lifting snow off the sidewalk. I started the engine and pulled away without looking back. That night, I wrote a single line in my notebook. Operation Sentinel active. It wasn't a plan drawn on a whiteboard. Just 3 words underlined twice. Routine kept me steady. Writing it down made it real. For the first time since the funeral, I slept a full night. The next day, I woke up before sunrise, ran 5 miles, showered, and ate oatmeal at the mess hall. My body was doing what it always did before an operation. Calm before movement. I checked my secure email. Howard had attached a spreadsheet showing Marlene's new contracts and deposits. Some of the payments were already bouncing because of the holds. He didn't write any commentary, just attached the file. I closed the laptop and reached for my duffel. The uniform inside smelled of starch and desert dust. I set it out on the bed, smoothing the creases with my hands. In the quiet of the barracks, the sound of soldiers outside faded, replaced by the small click of my pen as I circled dates on the calendar. Marlene was playing CEO. Howard was documenting violations. The system Grandpa built was holding. My part was simple. Stay disciplined, stay invisible, let the structure work. I poured another cup of coffee, the cheap kind from the mess hall, and watched the steam rise. The taste didn't matter. What mattered was that the day was moving, and so was the plan. The sound of a diesel engine idling outside my quarters cut through the morning quiet. A base delivery truck pulled up with a box addressed to me. Inside was the folded flag from Grandpa's coffin, and a small envelope from Howard's office acknowledging receipt. I ran my fingers over the stitching on the flag before setting it carefully on the desk. My phone vibrated again. A text from one of Grandpa's old neighbors, saying Marlene had moved into the homestead full-time and was already talking about renovations. I laced my boots and drove out anyway. The highway toward the homestead was clear except for patches of old snow. As I turned onto the street, the house looked the same from the curb, but the atmosphere had changed. A security guard in a rented uniform stood at the gate where there'd never been a gate before. Marlene had always wanted to look like she was running a movie set. I pulled up, rolled down the window. "It's my grandfather's house," I said. The guard checked a clipboard. "Name? Captain Adrian Blake." He glanced at his list. "I'm told to restrict access to authorized guests only." I looked past him at the porch. Marlene was standing there with a cell phone pressed to her ear, waving at someone inside. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the porch. The guard moved to block me. "I grew up here," I said. "My belongings are still in my room." He shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I'm just following orders." Marlene ended her call and came down the steps. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile she used when cutting someone off at a store return line. "Adrian, you can't just show up. This is my property now." "It was Grandpa's house," I said evenly. "Was," she said. "Everything's been transferred. You have the army. I have the estate. That's how it's going to be. I still have personal items inside." She turned to the guard. "Have someone pack her things and put them out front. She's not authorized to enter." The guard hesitated. "Ma'am, now?" Marlene snapped. I stood still, hands at my sides. Soldiers know when to hold their ground and when to conserve energy. 2 more contracted workers came out carrying a small box of my things. A second man dropped my old duffel bag on the porch steps like it was trash. Marlene crossed her arms. "I don't want any drama. Take your stuff and go. We'll ship the rest to your base." I walked up 1 step and met her eyes. "Grandpa wouldn't have done this." She shrugged. "Grandpa's gone. I'm in charge now." Behind her, workers were carrying out framed photos and stacking them near a dumpster. Books from the old library were being tossed into cardboard boxes marked "Donation." I bent down, picked up my duffel, and slung it over my shoulder. The strap felt heavier than it had in the desert. "Enjoy your new kingdom," I said quietly. Marlene smirked. "Don't be bitter. You chose a career that doesn't pay. I chose one that does." I turned away without answering. The guard stepped aside as I walked past. His eyes flicked between us, maybe realizing this wasn't just a family squabble. At the curb, I opened the trunk of my car, placed the duffel inside, and shut it gently. The cold wind off the mountains stung my face. I took a breath, started the engine, and drove off without looking back at the porch. 15 minutes later, I was at a gas station on the edge of town. I parked by the pumps, sat in the car with the engine running, and stared at the dashboard. The smell of diesel from the next pump mixed with the faint scent of coffee from the convenience store. My phone buzzed. Howard's name appeared on the screen. "Captain Blake," he said when I answered. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Oh, quote. "She had my things thrown out," I said flatly. "That's her second violation," he said. "We'll log it." I stared at the mountains. "You knew this would happen." "I knew it was possible," Howard said. "Your grandfather built in safeguards, but we need patience. I'm initiating another procedural hold this afternoon. Just keep your distance." I ended the call and sat still for a moment. My fingers tapped the steering wheel the way they did before a briefing. The difference was that this time there was no unit waiting for orders, only me, a lawyer, and a structure Grandpa had left behind. Back at Fort Carson, the barracks were loud with lunchtime traffic. I carried the duffel to my room and set it on the bed. Inside were small pieces of my childhood: a baseball glove Grandpa had given me, a photo album, an old Army field manual he'd marked up with notes. I put the glove on the shelf, the album in the drawer, and left the manual open on the desk. The manual was about operational security. A section underlined in Grandpa's handwriting read, "Do not reveal your plans. Let the opponent reveal theirs." I read it twice and closed the book. In the evening, I went for a run on the base perimeter road. The sun was setting behind Pikes Peak, turning the sky orange and gray. Each stride steadied me. People think revenge is about rage, but rage gets you sloppy. The Army had taught me that. Grandpa had reinforced it. When I got back to my room, I opened my laptop and started a simple document: timeline of Marlene's actions. I listed the will reading, the eviction, the new security guard, the boxes leaving the library. No adjectives, just facts, times, and dates. An email from Howard came through as I typed. Second hold in place. DoD review triggered. Continue documentation. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the flag folded on my desk. My reflection in the window looked calm, but inside the pattern was clear. Marlene was busy playing queen. Howard was quietly closing doors around her. And me, I was keeping record, letting the structure tighten. I stood, stretched the stiffness from my shoulders, and poured a glass of water. Outside, soldiers were marching in formation, their cadence echoing through the courtyard. The rhythm was steady, familiar. I let it run through my head like a metronome while I planned my next day. The flag on the desk caught a streak of light from the hallway, its edges sharp against the dark wood. I reached out, smoothed it once with my hand, and then turned off the desk lamp. The room settled into quiet except for the faint sound of boots outside, a reminder that discipline doesn't disappear when you're off duty. I lay back on the bunk, eyes open, tracing the ceiling tiles. My muscles felt coiled, but my breathing stayed even. Out beyond the base, Marlene was celebrating what she thought was her win. In here, I was building a record that would speak louder than any argument. The glow of my phone on the nightstand lit up with another secure message from Howard. All actions logged. Maintain course. I locked the screen without replying. The routine would hold. The structure would hold. My job was to stay steady. The next morning, the vibration of my alarm barely registered. I was already awake, sitting at my desk in uniform, staring at Grandpa's old field manual. The base was still quiet except for an occasional truck rolling past. I reached for the phone and dialed Howard's direct line. He answered on the first ring, his voice low and steady. "I've been documenting everything," I said. "Good," he replied. "You're going to need it. And it's time you knew the whole story." "When?" His choice of words sharpened my attention. "Go ahead." Howard exhaled. "The will you heard in my office was real but incomplete. Your grandfather didn't write a normal will. He built a test. He called it a character test. He wanted to give Marlene every chance to do the right thing, but he planned for the probability she wouldn't." I straightened in my chair. "A test?" "Yes," Howard said. "Legally, it's a fiduciary duty clause buried inside the inheritance. 30 days. She's supposed to protect and uphold the welfare of the Blake family and the legacy of the company during that period. Kicking you out of the homestead, liquidating assets, threatening longtime employees, those are violations. Each violation triggers more authority for me as executor." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "So he saw this coming." "Exactly," Howard said. "Your grandfather was a military engineer. He designed systems. This is just another system, but in the form of a state law. The moment Marlene crossed the line, She handed me the keys to a second document. That's why I've been freezing her moves. It's all by the book. I opened the laptop, typing as he spoke. What do you need from me? 2 things, he said. Stay out of direct confrontation and keep records of her conduct. The more she thinks you're gone, the more reckless she becomes. We have to let her reveal herself. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the folded flag. Understood. Good, Howard said. I'm filing another procedural hold today on a pending defense contract she tried to rush through. That will get her attention. After we hung up, I sat for a moment, hands flat on the desk. It wasn't just me and a lawyer anymore. Grandpa had left a framework, and I was sitting inside it like a forward observer. My job was simple: patience. By midday, I was at the base gym, working the heavy bag between drills. Each punch steadied my breathing. A couple of younger soldiers glanced at me but kept their distance. They probably thought I was blowing off steam. In reality, I was organizing my thoughts the way I would before a briefing. After showering, I stopped by the PX for coffee and a sandwich. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Howard. Did hold confirmed. Asset valuation triggered. I smiled faintly. That would jam up Marlene's latest deal. I drove off base to a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place Grandpa had liked. The waitress poured coffee without asking. I opened my laptop again, adding the new hold to the timeline. I also noted that Marlene had replaced the board at Blake Defense Systems with her friends from a real estate firm, another strike against her fiduciary duty. The doorbell above the diner door jingled. A local contractor who'd done work at the homestead walked in, saw me, and hesitated. He came over. Captain Blake? Yes. I don't want to get involved in family stuff, he said. But your sister just hired me to start tearing out the old workshop on the property. Said it's clutter. Thought you'd want to know. I thanked him, wrote it down, and paid for his coffee. Back in the car, I recorded a voice memo with the details. Grandpa had taught me, document, don't argue. Back on base, a training exercise was underway on the range. The crack of rifles echoed across the field. I watched the troops move through their drills, precise and disciplined. The pattern reminded me of what Howard had said. This was a system, a test. In the evening, I called one of Grandpa's old employees, a retired machinist who still kept in touch. He told me Marlene had announced layoffs at Blake Defense Systems, blaming estate delays. Another violation. I thanked him, added it to the log. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and sat on the edge of the bed with the flag in my lap. The house, the money, the company, they weren't random assets. They were the infrastructure of Grandpa's life's work. Marlene was tearing through it like it was hers to play with. She had no idea each move was being logged like coordinates on a map. The next morning before sunrise, I went for a run on the track. Frost clung to the edges of the grass. My breath formed clouds in the cold air. As I rounded the final lap, a calm settled in. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about execution, carrying out a plan designed by a man who'd spent his life teaching me discipline. Back in my quarters, I brewed coffee and checked messages. Another update from Howard. 3rd violation logged. Court notification prepped. I typed back only one word. Copy. I spent the afternoon drafting a personal memo summarizing what Howard had told me about the character test. Not speculation, just the facts. Clause, period, violations, triggers. If anything happened to me, someone else could pick it up and continue. As I wrote, memories surfaced of Grandpa walking me through a circuit board when I was a kid, showing me how one short could trip an entire system. Everything's connected, he'd said. Know the pathways and you can control the outcome. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains, I had a clean, clear record of Marlene's self-destruction. I saved it to an encrypted drive, closed the laptop, and set it aside. I sat at the desk, fingers drumming lightly, eyes fixed on the flag. The base loudspeaker crackled with the evening retreat call, and I stood automatically, facing the direction of the music until it ended. When I sat again, the room felt steady, like the inside of a command post. Marlene thought she had wiped me out of the picture. She thought the $95 million and the homestead were hers to rule. In reality, every decision she made was another entry in a system Grandpa had built, a system now running silently under her feet. I picked up my mug, took a slow sip of coffee, and opened a fresh page in the notebook. At the top I wrote, Operational phase begins. Then I started outlining the next steps in simple, block letters, the way Grandpa would have approved. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, the plan moved forward without a sound, each line in my notes a quiet marker on the path we were taking. The pen in my hand scraped across the page, each line of block text forming a checklist the way I'd done in briefing rooms overseas. Items weren't abstract thoughts. They were actions with owners and deadlines. At the top of the page, neutralize reckless spending. Under it, secure contracts, secure property, lock down accounts. Grandpa's system wasn't just a will anymore, it was a mission. I picked up the phone and called Howard. He answered with a clipped, "Davison here. Time to execute the plan," I said. "Already started," he replied. 2 bank freezes in place, the Department of Defense contract under review. I've also filed a temporary injunction on alterations to the homestead structures. She can't gut anything for now. "What about the company board she replaced?" I asked. "On my desk. Every one of her appointments violates the 30-day fiduciary duty clause. They're being served notice this morning. It will look like routine legal housekeeping. She won't know where it's coming from." I checked the time. "Good. I'll keep logging." Howard's voice softened slightly. "Captain, the less you engage with her directly, the stronger this holds. Let her think you've disappeared." I hung up and immediately encrypted my notes, saving them on a drive separate from my laptop. Years of military training had made operational security instinctive. My sister's chaos was only going to grow. My job was to stay unseen. Later that day, I met a friend from the Judge Advocate General's office for lunch on base. We talked hypotheticals. No names. If a fiduciary is actively depleting an estate, I asked, how fast can an executor act? He raised an eyebrow. Fast, if the clauses are tight. Even faster if you have clear evidence of breach. I thanked him, paid for the coffee, and left with his unspoken confirmation that Grandpa's trap was airtight. Back in my quarters, I opened a spreadsheet. Each row held an action Marlene had taken since the funeral. Staff firings, property changes, new car purchase, contracts signed. Next to each, a corresponding hold or injunction Howard had filed. The cells turned from yellow to green as each measure locked in place. At dusk, I left the base, drove to a quiet overlook above the city, and parked. From here, the lights below looked like a map board. Somewhere down there, Marlene was planning another shopping spree, thinking the estate was a bottomless pit of cash. She had no idea the walls were already sliding into place around her. My phone buzzed with a text from an old contact at Blake Defense Systems. "Your sister tried to move $2.4 into a private fund. Bank refused. She's furious." I logged it and deleted the message. I sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. Revenge wasn't the word for this. It was accountability, built step by step. The Army had taught me not to strike until the conditions favored success. Grandpa had taught me the same thing in his own language, of engineering and law. The next morning I went through PT with my unit, letting the rhythm of push-ups and running clear my head. Afterward, under the harsh light of the locker room, I scrolled through another secure message from Howard. Interior designer removed from site by court order. Homestead protected. I allowed myself one dry chuckle. The library Grandpa and I had built by hand would survive another day. That afternoon, while most of the base was at lunch, I used a secure line to talk to Howard again. He laid out the next phase like an operations officer briefing a mission. "We've frozen access to cash and contracts. Now we move on to third parties. Vendors, contractors, anyone she's hired. We'll notify them the estate is under procedural review. She'll get hit from all sides at once, but each hit will look like routine red tape." I pictured Marlene pacing in one of Grandpa's old rooms, phone pressed to her ear, trying to understand why every check was bouncing. "And my role? Stay invisible," Howard said. "Your silence gives her confidence to act out. The more she acts, the more evidence we have. When the 30 days are up, everything resets automatically." I ended the call, shut the laptop, and headed for the motor pool. Working on a Humvee engine for an hour steadied my hands. When I wiped the grease off my palms, a mechanic asked quietly, "You okay, Captain?" "Better than okay," I said, just focused. That evening, I drove into town for groceries. In the parking lot, a man I didn't recognize stopped me. Captain Blake? Yes. I do contracting work, he said. Your sister hired me for a kitchen demolition at the homestead. We got served a stop work order this morning. She told me you were behind it. I met his eyes. I'm not behind anything, I'm in the army. He nodded slowly. She's been making enemies fast. Thought you should know. I thanked him and walked inside the store. Each casual report like this was another piece of situational awareness, exactly what we'd rely on in a forward operating environment. Back in my quarters, I updated the spreadsheet, then looked at the flag on the desk. Grandpa had never raised his voice to Marlene, never tried to control her. Instead, he'd built this quiet, impenetrable system. Now I was simply carrying it out, one measured action at a time. The base loudspeaker played the evening retreat again. I stood at attention facing the sound. My breathing slowed to match the music's final notes. When it ended, I sat back down, opened the manual Grandpa had marked, and underlined a new line in red. A plan without patience is just noise. I set the pen aside and reviewed the checklist on my desk. Most items were already green. A few were still yellow, waiting for Howard's legal filings to complete. Everything was moving. Everything had a place. In the barracks hallway outside, boots echoed on the tile as soldiers passed. The rhythm was steady, like the ticking of a clock counting down not to an attack but to an outcome built by law and discipline. I closed my eyes briefly, picturing the homestead not as it was now but as it would be when this process finished, intact, secure, turned toward the future instead of Marlene's destruction. That image wasn't wishful thinking. It was a target objective. The phone vibrated one more time. Another secure message from Howard. All current holds active. Monitoring her moves. No response needed. I locked the screen without typing back. Silence was part of the operation. On the desk, the flag's shadow stretched across my notes. I shifted it slightly so it lay smooth, then went back to the spreadsheet, adding one more line to the log. Each keystroke felt like another brick sliding quietly into place, closing off the escape routes my sister didn't even know she was losing. The base cafeteria smelled of bacon and burnt coffee when my phone vibrated again. Another message from a contact inside Blake Defense Systems came through. She just authorized a company-paid shopping trip to New York. Luxury items, private jet, no board approval. I slid the phone face down and finished my eggs without reacting. Every report was another data point. Reacting to each one would only waste energy. After breakfast, I went to the gym and did a long, punishing workout. By the time I hit the showers, my head was clear. When I came back to my room, another message waited. New Maserati ordered. Deposit wired. I opened the spreadsheet, entered the new line, and colored it yellow. Howard would handle the hold. I sat back in my chair, picturing Marlene walking through boutiques, phone in one hand, a drink in the other, smiling like she had won something. It wasn't hard to imagine. She'd been rehearsing that role for years. The difference now was that she thought there were no limits. She had no idea every swipe of her new card was feeding a log with timestamps and receipts. That afternoon, I drove into town for a run on a trail Grandpa used to like. The trail wound behind old warehouses and came out by a strip of high-end stores. Parked at the curb was a blood-red sports car with temporary tags. Through the window of a boutique, I saw Marlene laughing with two women I didn't recognize. Bags from designers lined the counter. She was swiping a black card like it was a badge. I kept moving, not letting her see me. When I got back to the car, I sent Howard a short message. Vehicle confirmed. Purchase visible. He replied instantly. Wire hold in place. Deposit forfeited in 48 hours. Driving back to base, I thought about how quickly she'd burned through her new circle of friends. Most of them had drifted in after Grandpa's funeral, people who never set foot in the homestead before. I'd seen it happen overseas. The faster someone flashed cash, the faster they attracted opportunists. In my quarters that night, I updated the log with more details. I added a note about a rumor from a contractor who said Marlene planned to gut Grandpa's workshop and turn it into a personal spa. Another violation of the estate's preservation clause. The next morning, Howard called. His voice was calm but firm. She's making our job easy. Every transaction over $50,000 is being flagged automatically. Banks are cooperating without a fight. I've put a freeze on the workshop demolition until valuation is complete. I leaned back, sipping coffee. She doesn't see any of this coming. She thinks it's routine paperwork, Howard said. Let her. Later that day, a private investigator Howard had hired sent me a report. Photos of Marlene at a hotel bar, photos of expensive jewelry delivered to the homestead, screenshots of her social media posts about new life, new rules. Each picture went into a secure folder. No commentary, just evidence. At dinner in the base mess hall, a young sergeant asked why I was always typing on my laptop. Building a case study, I said with a half smile. It wasn't a lie. This was a case study in arrogance and procedure. That evening I drove out again, this time stopping at a coffee shop across from the Maserati dealership. Through the window, I watched salesmen walk around the red car with a clipboard. One of them answered a phone, frowned, and started peeling the reserved sign off the windshield. I didn't need a photo to know what that meant. Another line on my spreadsheet would soon turn green. Back at the base, I called one of Grandpa's old engineers who'd been laid off by Marlene last week. He told me she had bragged about hiring a celebrity designer to erase the past at the homestead. She'd laughed about the library, calling it a museum of dead paper. I thanked him, wrote it down, and encrypted the note. The pattern was textbook. Overreach, overspend, underestimate. She wasn't just violating a clause. She was giving a live demonstration of why Grandpa built the clause in the first place. By midweek, even the local paper had a small blurb about Marlene throwing a lavish party at the homestead. A neighbor sent me a picture. Tents on the lawn, champagne towers, a DJ booth where Grandpa's rose garden used to be. I logged it and moved on. That night, lying on my bunk with the flag folded neatly at the edge of the desk, I let my mind run through the timeline like a field exercise. Event, date, violation, hold. She was moving faster now, signing contracts, making promises she couldn't fulfill. Every move she made tightened the framework Grandpa had left behind. In the morning, Howard's email arrived. Designer billed her for wasted time. Injunction upheld. Workshop intact. Another green cell on the sheet. I closed the laptop, put on my boots, and went for a run before sunrise. The air was cold and sharp. As my feet hit the pavement, I thought about Grandpa teaching me chess at the kitchen table when I was a kid. He'd said, "You don't win by attacking first. You win by controlling space." This wasn't chess exactly, but the principle was the same. When I came back, I brewed fresh coffee and checked messages. Another update from Howard. Car dealer released vehicle. Deposit forfeited. Party invoices unpaid. I typed copy and nothing else. The base loudspeaker played the morning call to colors. I stood at attention automatically, then sat again. On my desk, the spreadsheet glowed with rows of yellow turning green. Outside, soldiers moved through drills, their cadence steady and practiced. Inside, my hands were steady too, logging each misstep of a sister who thought she'd outsmarted everyone. I opened a new tab and started a document labeled Post-Probate Plan. Not speculation, just preparation. Grandpa had left me the blueprint. My job was to build from it without noise, without anger. As the day shifted into evening, the barracks quieted. I checked the flag on the desk one more time, smoothed its edges, and shut off the lamp. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light left in the room. Each keystroke added another layer to a structure Marlene didn't even know she was inside. Outside, a convoy rolled past the base, headlights cutting through the dark. The sound of diesel faded, leaving only the low hum of the heater and the soft click of my keyboard as I entered one more line in the log. A cold gust blew across the base parade ground as I finished a morning run. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my windbreaker. I stopped under a lamppost, pulled it out, and read the message from Howard. All holds fully active. Estate accounts inaccessible. Vendors notified. I exhaled slowly. The trap Grandpa built was now airtight. Back in my quarters, I opened the spreadsheet. Most of the yellow cells were now green. The car purchase, blocked. The designer's demolition, stopped. The defense contract, frozen. Marlene's party invoices, unpaid. It wasn't theory anymore. She was living inside an invisible cage of legal procedure. I poured coffee and called Howard. Status? He sounded almost clinical. She tried 3 withdrawals this morning. All declined. Called the bank in a rage. They referred her to me. I answered with the same calm script we practiced. She hung up on me. Good, I said. Any signs she's catching on? She thinks it's bureaucratic incompetence. not sabotage. I sipped coffee. That won't last. Howard chuckled quietly. True, but every day she spends blaming others is another day the record builds itself. I ended the call, encrypted the spreadsheet, and left for the motor pool. Working with grease and steel steadied me. Soldiers passed, nodding. To them I was just another officer keeping busy. Later, sitting at a diner near the base, I got a text from one of Grandpa's old engineers. She fired the catering company after they demanded payment, threatened to sue. Guests from her party not answering calls. Another data point. I updated the log right there on the counter, the waitress topping off my mug without asking. Next to each event I wrote a single word in block letters. Violation. Out the window, a billboard advertised luxury condos in Denver. I wondered if Marlene was already planning to buy one. If she tried, she'd find every door locked. Back at the homestead, according to Howard's investigator, Marlene's days had shifted from shopping sprees to frantic phone calls. The Maserati dealer had sent a final notice. Deposit forfeited, car released. The designer had billed her for wasted time. Contractors refused to start work without upfront payment. Her new friends stopped showing up. The grand house she thought she'd conquered was silent again, but now it was the silence of empty rooms and unpaid invoices. I pictured her standing in Grandpa's library, the same library she called a morgue, looking at piles of boxes she'd ordered removed, but couldn't afford to move. It wasn't a satisfying image. It was just evidence of a system doing what it was built to do. On base, I kept my schedule steady. PT, briefings, lunch, updating the log, calls with Howard. In the evenings, I sat at my desk with the folded flag and the manual Grandpa had underlined. One line stood out now. Control space. Let the opponent move into it. Howard's evening update came through. She's calling your old friends. Looking for you. No one talking. I typed back. Copy. At dusk, I drove to the edge of town and parked where I could see the homestead's roofline over the trees. From here, it looked like a postcard. Unchanged. But inside, every account was locked. Every contractor gone. Every promise she made, evaporating. A neighbor's text arrived. She tried to host another dinner tonight. Only 2 guests showed. She seemed desperate. I logged it, deleted the text. When I got back to base, the barracks were quiet. I unlocked my quarters, set my keys on the desk, and opened the laptop. The spreadsheet filled the screen. Rows of dates, actions, holds. It didn't look like revenge. It looked like an audit trail. I leaned back, eyes on the flag. Grandpa's plan was working, but not because it was clever. It was working because it used her own impatience against her. The next morning, during PT, a private asked me if I ever got tired of running. Not yet, I said. Running cleared the noise. It reminded me discipline wins where anger fails. After breakfast, Howard called again. She left me another voicemail, he said. This one was more pleading than angry. She's asking if you're okay. Wants me to tell you she's sorry for misunderstandings. I kept my voice even. She'll say whatever she thinks will get her money back. Exactly, Howard said. We don't engage. We just record. I hung up and added a note to the log. First tone shift anger to plea. Another data point. In the afternoon, I met with a training group about cybersecurity protocols. As they discussed firewall layers, I thought about Grandpa's estate as the ultimate firewall. Layers of law and patience shielding legacy from exploitation. That evening, after chow, I walked across the parade ground under a darkening sky. The air smelled of cold metal and diesel. Each step felt measured, grounded. In a way, Grandpa's system had become a new kind of training exercise for me. Endurance, record-keeping, restraint. Back in my room, I opened the laptop once more. The spreadsheet glowed like a quiet map of a battle already in progress. At the top, under status, I wrote, All holds active, subject isolated. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the base outside, boots on tile, a door closing, a distant truck. No dramatic music, no big speeches, just process, steady and unbroken. I reached over and straightened the folded flag on the desk. Its edges were sharp and precise, like everything Grandpa had built. Then I picked up my pen and began to write down the next round of actions, each word in clear block letters, no flourishes, no wasted motion. The next morning, I was already on the base obstacle course before sunrise, hands gripping the cold steel bars. The air bit at my skin, but each pull-up kept my mind sharp. When I dropped down and wiped my palms, my phone buzzed on the bench. A message from Howard read, "She's been calling every contact you've ever had. Police reports show no missing persons, just her panic." I put the phone down, laced my boots, and jogged back to the barracks. Inside my quarters, the spreadsheet glowed faintly on the laptop screen. I scrolled down to the last line, subject isolated, and added a new note. Switch to direct search for me. The moment she went from spending to chasing was another marker. I closed the lid and poured coffee. By mid-morning, I had a short briefing with my CO, then headed off base for groceries. At a stoplight near town, a black SUV slowed beside me. I glanced over and saw Marlene behind the wheel, wearing oversized sunglasses. Her expression when our eyes met was a flash of shock and something else, fear. The light turned green. She hit the gas and sped off down a side street. I parked at a small store on the edge of town and walked inside. My phone buzzed again, Howard this time. "She's been at your old friend's houses, showed up at the machinist's place yesterday. Told him she needed to find Adrian before it's too late." I spoke quietly. "Did he tell her anything?" "He told her he hadn't seen you. Which is true, keep your movements low profile for now." I hung up, grabbed a few essentials, and paid in cash. Out in the parking lot, a different SUV cruised slowly past. It might have been coincidence, but I ducked into a side alley and circled back to my car. Back at base, I updated the log. Under subject behavior, I wrote, "Shift from arrogance to desperation, attempting personal contact." I attached a note about the SUV sighting. Grandpa's system had anticipated her greed, but seeing her move into active pursuit put a new weight in my chest. This wasn't a boardroom chess game anymore. She was trying to close physical distance. At lunch in the mess hall, two young soldiers joked about crazy family drama. After watching some reality show, one asked me if I had family back home. I gave a neutral answer and went back to my tray. In the afternoon, Howard called again. "She tried to enter my office without an appointment," he said. Receptionist turned her away. "She's rattled." "Did she say why?" I asked. "She claimed she wanted to resolve misunderstandings and cooperate," her words. "Then she demanded to know where you were." I leaned back in my chair. "She thinks I'm the obstacle." "She's wrong," Howard said. "The clause is the obstacle. She's only now realizing you're not even pulling the levers." That evening, I drove to a quiet pullout overlooking the homestead. Lights were on in the big front windows, but the driveway was empty except for her SUV. The once manicured lawn was littered with boxes and torn decorations from the party. She'd tried to build a kingdom out of Grandpa's work, and now she was pacing its empty halls alone. I stayed in the car, engine off, just watching the windows. Through a gap in the curtains, I caught a glimpse of her moving back and forth with a phone in her hand. Even from this distance, I could see the frantic gestures. When I got back to base, I wrote a long entry in the log. Day 25. Subject exhibiting signs of panic. Contacts exhausted. Began direct approach to executor. Attempted to locate me physically. No public awareness of underlying plan. I shut the laptop, stood, and stretched. Outside in the hallway, boots clattered on tile as a platoon returned from evening training. Their cadence echoed steady and sure. I felt my own breathing fall into rhythm with it. The next morning during PT, I pictured Marlene's face at the stoplight, how quickly her mask had cracked. That image reminded me not to underestimate the emotional shift happening on her side of the equation. Desperation can make people unpredictable. After breakfast, I called Howard. "She's escalating," I said. "I know," he replied, "but she's still inside the box your grandfather built. Every dollar she tries to move is still frozen. Every contractor she calls is still bound by the injunctions. Her only option is to look for you and try to negotiate. Let her." I ended the call and sat for a moment, coffee cooling in my hand. Outside my window, a formation moved across the parade ground, boots striking in unison. Order, discipline, timing, everything Grandpa's plan depended on. That afternoon, one of Grandpa's old neighbors texted me a photo of Marlene knocking on his door. Caption, "She's asking everyone where you are." I thanked him and deleted the photo. Another line for the log. In the evening, I took a slow walk around the base perimeter. The sky was darkening, a thin line of red on the horizon. Each step cleared my head, reinforcing the difference between reaction and execution. Marlene's search wasn't a threat to the plan. It was proof the plan was working. Back in my room, I unlocked the laptop. The spreadsheet filled the screen like a silent report of a mission unfolding. I typed at the bottom, "Subject approaching collapse phase." Not as a prediction, but as an observation. I poured water into a glass, set it next to the flag, and leaned back. The quiet hum of the heater filled the room. No speeches, no confrontation, just the slow closing of an invisible wall built out of law, timing, and my grandfather's foresight. Across town, my sister was still driving from house to house, looking for leverage that didn't exist, burning the last of her gas in a luxury SUV she could barely afford to fill. Inside this room, the structure held steady, each keystroke another bolt in a framework she'd never understood. I adjusted the folded flag, clicked save on the document, and let the screen go dark while the base settled into its nightly routine. The sound of distant boots and muted voices drifting through the hallways like clockwork. I buttoned my dress uniform with the same precision I used before inspections. Each crease, each pin, aligned exactly. The mirror on the barracks wall reflected a calm face, but my hands were steady from years of routine, not nerves. My phone buzzed on the desk with a short message from Howard. She agreed to meet. Conference room at 10. Come in full uniform. I slid the phone into my pocket, picked up my cap, and walked out. The winter air cut against my cheeks as I crossed the base lot to my car. The drive to Howard's building was short, familiar now. On the way, I watched the traffic lights change without hurry, the rhythm steady, like breathing before a jump. Inside the office building, the marble lobby was quiet. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes flicking over my uniform, then back to her screen. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The doors opened onto a corridor lined with framed photos of past legal teams. At the end, the conference room door stood open. Howard was already there, arranging papers on the table. "She's on her way," he said quietly. I nodded once and sat across from him. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. I set my cap down, clasped my hands on the table, and waited. Minutes later, the door opened. Marlene stepped inside wearing a tailored coat over a dress that looked expensive but rumpled. Her hair was hastily pinned back, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look older. She froze for a second when she saw me, then forced a smile. "Adrian," she said, "you look official." "Sit down," Howard said evenly. She sank into the chair opposite me, clutching a leather bag. Her eyes flicked between my uniform and Howard's papers. "I'm glad you're here. This whole situation has been a misunderstanding." Howard's voice stayed neutral. "You've asked to speak about the estate." "Yes," she said quickly. "The banks keep freezing my transactions. Vendors are walking out. Contracts are being held. It's hurting the company and me. I know Grandpa wanted us to work together. We need to fix this." I kept my gaze steady on her. "What part do you think is a misunderstanding?" Her jaw tightened. "I've been trying to modernize everything. You've been—" She stopped herself, took a breath. "You've been absent. I thought you didn't care. Maybe I went too far with some spending, but I didn't know about all these conditions." Howard slid a single sheet across the table. "This is a summary of the fiduciary duty clause you accepted when you took control. You had 30 days to preserve assets and protect family members. Evicting Captain Blake was your first violation. The others are listed below." She scanned the page, her face draining of color. "I didn't sign up for this." "You signed exactly this," Howard said. "Walter Blake wrote the clause himself. It's binding. Each violation has been documented." Her voice rose. "I'm still his granddaughter. He wanted me to have the company." I spoke quietly but firmly. "He wanted you to have a chance. You chose how to use it." "Well." She looked at me, eyes flicking with anger and something else, panic. "You've been behind this, freezing my accounts, turning people against me." "I haven't touched your accounts," I said. "Howard has acted as executor under Grandpa's instructions. Everything happening is procedure." Marlene pushed back from the table slightly. "I've lost everything. The house, the contracts." Howard interrupted gently. "Nothing is final yet, but the codicil to the will is clear. If violations continue, all assets transfer to the legacy trust." Her hands gripped the edge of the table. I can fix it. Just tell me what to do. I leaned forward, my voice still even. Start by understanding this isn't about me. This is about Grandpa's legacy. He built something to outlast us. You treated it like a personal jackpot. She looked down at the paper again, lips pressed together. I didn't know. Howard placed another folder on the table. Documentation of every transaction, every contract, every eviction. This is the record. She stared at the folder but didn't touch it. The silence stretched. Outside the window, a faint snow began to fall. I sat back, hands resting on my knees. Years of deployments had taught me how to wait out silence. Marlene finally looked up. You could have warned me. I did, I said simply. At the homestead. You told me to leave. Her shoulders sagged. I thought you'd fight me. I didn't think you'd disappear. No. I let out a slow breath. Grandpa taught me patience before tactics. He also taught me that discipline isn't revenge, it's respect. Howard gathered the papers into a neat stack. We'll proceed according to the codicil. You're still within the window to comply, but any further violations trigger automatic transfer. Marlene's voice was barely audible. And if that happens? Then the Pierce Legacy Trust takes over, Howard said. Captain Blake becomes trustee. You receive a monthly stipend conditional on working at the Veterans Center. Those are Walter's words, not ours. She stared at the tabletop, fingers trembling. A stipend. After everything I've done for this family? I kept my tone level. The family isn't a slogan. It's a responsibility. Grandpa believed in second chances, but he didn't believe in free rides. The snow outside thickened, flakes sliding down the window glass. Marlene sat back, her eyes glistening, but no tears falling. She drew a shaky breath and tried to square her shoulders. Howard closed the folder and stood. We're done for today. I'll be in touch with your counsel. Marlene rose slowly, her movements less certain than when she entered. She looked at me once more, as if searching for a crack in my expression. I gave her nothing but calm. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then turned and walked out, the sound of her heels fading down the hall. Howard exhaled quietly. Well done. End 4. I didn't answer immediately. I picked up my cap, placed it under my arm, and stood. The conference room felt larger now, the air cooler. Howard looked at me. We're approaching the end of the 30 days. Everything is documented. Whatever happens next, it will be by the book. I adjusted my uniform. That's all I ever wanted. We left the room together. The hallway empty except for the faint sound of the elevator bell down the corridor. Outside, the snow had stopped and the city streets glistened under a pale Sunday. I walked to my car, the flag folded in my mind like the one on my desk, edges precise, nothing left to chance. I started the engine, hands steady on the wheel, and merged into traffic without looking back at the building. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves of the courthouse as I walked up the steps in my uniform. My cap stayed under my arm, my free hand gripping a folder of notes, even though I didn't need them. Howard was waiting inside, his tie perfectly knotted, expression calm. He nodded once. It's time. We entered the small probate chamber, where a judge sat behind a heavy desk, and a few clerks lined the walls. Marlene was already at the table, her lawyer whispering urgently to her. She looked pale and exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from weeks of scrambling. Her hands clutched a small purse instead of a briefcase. Howard addressed the judge with practiced formality. Your Honor, as executor of the Walter Blake estate, I'm submitting documentation of fiduciary duty violations committed by the temporary heir, Marlene Blake. I'm also presenting the sealed codicil to the will. The judge glanced at the clock, then at Marlene. Miss Blake, you've had counsel review these documents? Her lawyer started to speak, but she interrupted, voice tight. I didn't know about any of this. This wasn't what Grandpa wanted. Howard opened the codicil and read aloud. Upon breach of fiduciary duty by the designated heir within 30 days of assumption of control, all assets, including but not limited to Blake Defense Systems, the homestead, and associated accounts, transfer immediately and irrevocably to the Blake Legacy Trust. Trustee, Captain Adrian Blake. A quiet thud seemed to move through the room. Marlene's lawyer lowered his eyes. Marlene stared at the paper as if it might change if she blinked enough. This can't be legal, she said weakly. It's legal, the judge said. And airtight. Mr. Davison has submitted full documentation. The transfer stands effective today. Howard handed over a stack of signed forms. The trust charter directs the company's profits to fund scholarships in cybersecurity and training programs for veterans. The trustee will manage operations in line with Walter Blake's stated mission. I remained silent, standing straight. Years of military protocol held my face steady, even as my sister's world shifted in front of me. Marlene looked at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. So you get everything. You just sat back and waited. I spoke evenly. I didn't get everything. Grandpa's mission does. I'm just responsible for carrying it out. Her lawyer touched her arm, but she jerked it away. I'm his granddaughter. You're turning me into an employee. Howard kept his tone measured. The codicil provides you with a stipend of $2,500 a month, contingent on full-time work at the Veterans Center. That's the only condition under which you receive funds from the trust. Marlene's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. When she found her voice, it was low and incredulous. A stipend, after $95 million. I held her gaze. A stipend and a job. Grandpa believed work keeps people grounded. He wanted you included, but not entitled. End of 6. She sat down slowly, as if her knees couldn't hold her. Her lawyer shuffled papers, but the outcome was already sealed. The judge stamped the final page and slid it across the desk. The codicil is in effect. Captain Blake, you are now trustee of the Blake Legacy Trust. Mr. Davison will assist you with transfer procedures. I accepted the document with a steady hand. Yes, Your Honor. Howard thanked the court and began collecting the files. Marlene stared straight ahead, her face blank, then suddenly whispered, "He set me up." "No," I said quietly. "He gave you a chance." The judge stood, signaling the session was over. We exited into the hallway. Reporters weren't waiting. Howard had made sure of that. The building was almost empty, just the echo of our footsteps on the tile. Marlene followed a few paces behind, her heels clicking unevenly. She caught up to me at the door. "Adrian," she said, voice softer now. "What am I supposed to do?" I paused, met her eyes. "Show up at the Veterans Center. Work. Learn what Grandpa actually built. That's the only way you stay connected to any of it." She looked down, then nodded once, a quick jerk of her head, and walked away with her lawyer. Howard held the door open for me. Outside, the sky had cleared, and the cold air felt sharper. "It's done," he said simply. I adjusted my cap under my arm. Now the real work starts. We walked down the courthouse steps together. The street was quiet, the city moving on with its day as if nothing had happened. A delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. At the curb, my car waited. I opened the door, set the folder carefully on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. In the side mirror, I saw Marlene get into her lawyer's sedan, shoulders hunched, no sunglasses now. The car pulled away slowly, blending into traffic. I drove back toward the base, the folder resting against the seat like an unexploded shell. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a charter, a duty, a roadmap for something Grandpa had trusted me to do. Back in my quarters, I placed the document next to the folded flag on my desk. The two together looked like a mission brief waiting for execution. I took off my cap, smoothed the edges of the flag, and opened a fresh notebook page. At the top, I wrote in block letters, Pierce Legacy Trust, Operational Plan. I listed tasks, secure board appointments, audit current contracts, contact scholarship partners, coordinate with veterans training programs. No adjectives, no commentary, just work to be done. The barracks outside hummed with normal evening sounds. Soldiers laughing in the hallway, a radio playing faintly in someone's room, boots crossing tile. My breathing matched the rhythm. I glanced at Grandpa's old field manual still open on the desk. The underlined lines stared back at me, patience before tactics. We had reached the point where tactics ended and execution began. I picked up my pen, made the first check mark on the list, and started writing the next steps in clear block letters. Each one a quiet commitment to carry out the mission that had just been placed fully in my hands. Morning light spilled through tall windows of the renovated library as I walked between rows of new desks. The smell of fresh paint had faded, replaced by coffee and paper from training manuals stacked neatly on tables. 6 months of work had transformed the old homestead into the Blake Legacy Center. The wooden beams Grandpa had carved now framed computer labs, filled with veterans learning cybersecurity. Screens flickered with code instead of dust motes. I stopped to greet a group of trainees, 2 former Marines, a Navy corpsman, and a young Army specialist. They were working on a network security exercise I'd designed with one of Grandpa's retired engineers. "Good job isolating that breach," I said, leaning over their shoulders. They grinned, proud of their progress. For them, this wasn't charity, it was a mission, a way to rebuild a life after service. At the far end of the room, a banner read, "Walter Blake Legacy Trust, Training Tomorrow's Defenders." It wasn't flashy. It was clear, like Grandpa would have wanted. I walked into my small office at the back of the library. On the wall hung Grandpa's photo from his Army days, and beneath it the folded flag from his funeral. The codicil sat in a locked drawer, its work mostly complete. My desk held schedules, budgets, and a list of scholarship recipients. No drama, just operations. Through the glass window, I could see Marlene at the reception desk wearing a plain polo shirt with the center's logo. She was talking quietly to an older veteran about his paperwork. Her hair was tied back, no jewelry except a small watch. When she handed the veteran a form, she smiled, not the practiced smile from before, but a smaller, genuine one. He thanked her, and she pointed him toward a classroom. I stepped out of the office and walked over. "How's intake going?" I asked. "Steady," she said without looking up. Her voice was even, almost subdued. "We've got 6 new applicants this week, all former service members." "That's good," I said. "Make sure they get the orientation packet." She nodded and reached for a stack of folders. Her hands moved quickly, like someone who had learned a routine. There was no sign of the woman who once threw me out of the homestead with a security guard at her side. A few minutes later, she followed me into the office carrying a clipboard. "I've finished the volunteer schedule," she said. "We're covered for the next 2 weeks. Leave it on the desk," I told her. "Thanks." She hesitated before setting it down. "I didn't think I'd still be here after 6 months," she said quietly. I looked up at her. "You showed up? That's what Grandpa wanted." She shifted her weight. "At first, I just wanted the stipend, but working here, it's different." She glanced at the photo of Grandpa on the wall. I didn't understand what he built. I thought it was about money. I folded my hands on the desk. He built a system to protect people. The money just keeps it running. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Guess he protected it from me too." "Guess he did," I said. She looked down at the clipboard, then back at me. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say I get it now." I nodded once. "Good. Au revoir." She left the office and went back to the reception desk. Through the window, I watched her greet another veteran with a handshake. No designer dresses, no entourage, just work. In the afternoon, I walked the grounds of the old homestead, now the training center campus. The rose garden had been replanted by volunteers, not for parties but as a quiet spot for study breaks. The old workshop Marlene once wanted to demolish now housed a computer lab. Veterans were inside soldering hardware for hands-on security drills. At the edge of the property, a small sign read, "In memory of Walter Blake, engineer, soldier, mentor." I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, the winter sun on my face. Later, back inside, I joined a class session where a retired Army captain was teaching network defense fundamentals. The veterans sat in a semicircle, taking notes, asking questions. Their focus reminded me of my own training days, alert, determined, no wasted motion. During a break, one of them came up to me. "Ma'am, thank you for this place. I thought nobody cared after we got out." I shook his hand. "We care, you're needed. This isn't charity, it's investment." He smiled and went back to his seat. At my desk again, I updated the operations file. Enrollment numbers up 20%. Scholarship applications doubled. Community partnerships expanding. No headlines, no speeches, just steady growth. Grandpa's long view was paying off. As evening fell, the trainees filed out, talking quietly. Marlene locked the front door and turned off the lobby lights. She came into my office to hand me the keys. "See you tomorrow," she said simply. "Drive safe," I replied. After she left, I sat alone for a moment. The library was quiet, except for the hum of the computers in sleep mode. Outside, Snow flurries drifted past the windows. I looked at Grandpa's photo on the wall. I stood, walked over, and straightened the frame. The folded flag below it caught a slant of light from the desk lamp. My reflection in the glass looked tired but steady. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. It was about a plan executed with patience, turning betrayal into service, turning money into opportunity. The woman who once threw me out now staffed the front desk of a center helping veterans. The company Grandpa built was funding scholarships and training programs instead of parties. I returned to the desk, opened the notebook, and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. Mission ongoing. Under it, I listed tomorrow's tasks: review grant proposals, approve curriculum update, meet with local employers about job placements for graduates. Each line was work, not drama. The heater clicked softly as it cycled on. Outside the window, the campus lights glowed over snow-dusted walkways. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. I closed the notebook, placed my pen neatly on top, and looked once more at the folded flag. Grandpa's lessons, discipline, patience, responsibility had carried me through deployments, through loss, through this test. They were carrying this place now, brick by brick, program by program. I shut off the desk lamp. The room settled into quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of work well underway.